In the bustling airport terminal, two young twins stood nervously at the check-in counter. Their hands were tightly clasped together, their faces a mix of excitement and apprehension for the long-awaited trip. Dressed simply, they were trying to blend in, but there was something undeniably unique about them. The airline staff glanced at them skeptically, their eyes scanning the twins as if they didn't quite belong. Then, without warning, the attendant's voice cut through the air. "Sorry, but you two don't belong here. We can't let you board." The words hit harder than expected, cold and dismissive. The twins, visibly shocked, tried to explain, but the officer was firm, refusing to back down. This wasn't a typical case of missed paperwork or a simple misunderstanding. The officer's tone carried something deeper, something that made the air feel heavier, more uncomfortable. They had been targeted, not because of what they lacked, but because of who they were. What followed would leave everyone stunned. The twins weren't going to let this slide. They had an ace up their sleeve, one that would change the course of the day. Just wait until you see what happens next. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main characters. The twins, no longer willing to stand by and let this injustice slide, quickly reached for their phones. The young boy, his fingers trembling slightly but his voice steady, dialed the number he had memorized countless times, the one he knew would change everything. The line clicked, and the voice on the other end was calm, familiar, and powerful. It was their father, the CEO of one of the world's largest companies, and the owner of the very airline they were being denied entry to. "Dad, they won't let us board," the boy said, his words steady but filled with frustration. A brief silence followed. Then, the response came, crisp and commanding. "I'll handle it." Within minutes, the once confident airline staff was about to face the consequences of their actions. The twins' father wasn't the type to let things like this slide, not when his children were involved. The game was about to change. Stay tuned to see how this powerful father-daughter duo flipped the situation on its head. Tension hung in the air as the twins stood there, still reeling from the rejection they had just faced. The air around them seemed heavier, the moment stretched, and even the usually bustling airport felt eerily quiet. As the young boy hung up the phone, his hands still trembling slightly, his eyes locked with his twin sisters. They shared a moment of silent understanding. They had done everything right. They had tickets, they had the confirmation, and yet, they were being denied simply because of who they were. But what the staff didn't know was that this was just the beginning of what was coming. The twins had a card to play, and it was a powerful one. Just moments after the call, a new authority began to walk through the airport terminal. Their father, the CEO of the airline, wasn't a man who took rejection lightly, especially when it came to his children. He was known for his unyielding sense of justice, and this time, he wasn't going to let this slip by. His reputation alone was enough to make even the most powerful corporations take notice. But as he made his way to the customer service counter, he wasn't angry, not yet. He was calm. His gaze was steady, but everyone around him could feel the weight of his presence. His sharp suit was immaculate, every step purposeful, each one echoing in the now quiet terminal. When he reached the counter, the attendant looked up at him with a mixture of disbelief and fear. She knew immediately who he was. He didn't need an introduction. He didn't need to say much either. Without a word, he made eye contact with the manager, who had been part of the rejection earlier, and gave a single nod. The manager knew instantly what was coming, and panic began to set in. The CEO didn't waste time. "You've made a grave mistake," he said calmly, his voice carrying a calm authority that immediately cut through the tension. "I trust that this situation will be resolved swiftly. I would hate to escalate it further." The manager stammered, his nerves showing, but it was too late. He wasn't going to escape this easily. The CEO had his children's back, and that meant everyone else would soon see the consequences of their actions. The CEO made a few quick calls, the lines buzzing with the weight of what he was about to do. Within moments, a ripple of activity began at the airport. The situation escalated quickly, as the airline's legal and corporate teams were notified of the incident. The security team began to circle the area. What had started as a simple act of bias now threatened to bring down much more. The CEO turned to his children, the twins who were still standing by, trying to process everything that had just happened. "I won't let anyone treat you this way. Not today, not ever," he said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. They nodded, grateful for the unwavering support. They knew that their father was not just fighting for them, but for anyone who had ever been treated unfairly. This wasn't about pride or status. This was about correcting a wrong, about showing the world that bias and discrimination wouldn't be tolerated. The CEO glanced once more at the staff who had rejected his children, his gaze cold and calculating. His next words were sharp, each one cutting through the silence. "I expect a full apology to be issued, not just to my children, but to anyone who has faced this kind of treatment today." The manager, now realizing the gravity of his actions, started to stutter. "Sir, we didn't mean," the CEO interrupted, his tone firm. "Your intentions don't matter. Your actions do. And today, your actions have consequences." As the CEO made his final call to the legal team, the airport staff looked on, stunned. No one spoke, but everyone felt the shift in the atmosphere. The twins stood side by side, their backs straight now, their faces reflecting a mixture of relief and pride. They had known, deep down, that their father wouldn't let them face this alone. This wasn't just about their flight being canceled. This was about sending a message. They had the power, and now they were using it to demand change. A few minutes later, the resolution was swift. The airline issued a public apology, not just for the incident, but for the deep-seated prejudice that had allowed it to happen. The manager was put on leave, and a full investigation into the staff's behavior was launched. As the CEO stood by his children, his phone buzzing with calls from the corporate office, he turned to them with a smile. "Justice isn't always loud, but it's always powerful," he said softly. And with that, they walked out of the terminal, not as victims, but as the champions of their own story. The message had been delivered, and the change had begun. As the CEO, with his children by his side, walked out of the terminal, the weight of the moment didn't seem to lift. The entire situation felt surreal, like something out of a movie. The twins were no longer the shocked, helpless children from earlier. They had seen their father in action, and the transformation was profound. They had never been prouder of him, but now, they knew, more than ever, that their father's fight wasn't just for them. It was for everyone who had ever faced unfairness, discrimination, or prejudice. The CEO, always composed, had handled it with such poise. It was as though he was simply moving chess pieces on a board, calmly and decisively. He knew what had to be done. In the car, heading back to their private jet, the twins exchanged looks of disbelief and triumph. It wasn't every day that someone got to see their parents stand up so fiercely, and it was something that would stay with them forever. But it wasn't over yet. The CEO's phone buzzed with notifications. His legal team was already working on a response to the viral incident. The story was already spreading across social media, catching the attention of everyone from industry leaders to ordinary citizens who had witnessed the disgraceful act at the airport. His team was already drafting a statement to address the situation, but the CEO wasn't content to just let the apology speak for itself. He had bigger plans. He wasn't just going to let one bad incident slide under the radar. His mission was to root out systemic issues, the ones that allowed people to believe they could get away with treating others differently based on their race. The moment the twins and their father had left the terminal, the ripple effect began. The public began to speak out, with many people who had witnessed the event coming forward. Video footage of the confrontation quickly went viral, shared across platforms with hashtags like #JusticeForTheTwins and #RacialBias. The public was awake now, and they weren't about to let this moment be swept under the rug. The CEO wasn't done. A few hours later, he called an emergency meeting at his corporate headquarters. The twins, though still processing the events of the day, sat in the conference room with their father. This was a different side of him they rarely saw, the side of a business mogul who understood the power of influence. "This is bigger than just a single incident," he said to the room of executives. "This is about creating a culture of accountability. It's about showing the world that we won't tolerate discrimination in any form, especially not in the very company we've built." He paused, looking directly at his children. "And it's about making sure they know they'll always have my support." The room was silent for a moment as the weight of his words sank in. The CEO then turned to his team, giving clear instructions. They would issue an official statement of apology, but they would also implement new diversity and inclusion policies across the company's branches, starting with their airline. No longer would people get away with making assumptions based on appearance or race. It was time for a real change, and his company was going to lead the charge. The message had been made loud and clear at the airport, but now it was time to make sure the change reached beyond that single moment. He instructed his PR team to begin drafting a comprehensive action plan, one that would go far beyond the usual corporate diversity training. They would establish an entire division within the company focused on monitoring, assessing, and rectifying any racial biases, both at the executive and entry-level positions. It was an ambitious move, but the CEO wasn't one to shy away from big challenges. The twins, sitting in the back of the room, could feel the weight of their father's determination. They had never seen him more driven. The same man who had quietly supported their dreams was now using his influence to make a real, lasting impact. And they realized something important. Change doesn't just happen. It takes someone who's willing to fight for it. After the meeting, the CEO addressed the media, making sure the world knew exactly what had happened, how it was being handled, and how the company was committed to ensuring something like this would never happen again. His voice was calm, but there was a fire in it that resonated with everyone who heard it. He wasn't just making a statement. He was leading a movement. The incident at the airport was just the beginning, and they had already started to change the world, one action at a time. The days that followed were filled with intense activity. The CEO and his legal team worked tirelessly, drafting new policies and reviewing the public's reaction to the incident. The story had gone viral, and now it was bigger than just the twins and their father. It was a statement to the world. No longer would systemic discrimination be allowed to operate behind closed doors. People were watching, and they were expecting change. Meanwhile, the twins, though they had lived most of their lives under the shield of their father's power, found themselves grappling with the wider implications of the events. They had seen their father as a protector, as someone who could fix any problem with the snap of his fingers, but now, they were beginning to realize the full weight of the responsibility he carried. It was one thing to have influence and money. It was another thing entirely to wield that power in a way that could actually change the world. The CEO's team had already begun reviewing the footage of the airport confrontation. They saw the way the airline staff treated the twins with disdain, ignoring the basic decency of customer service simply because of their appearance. What was worse was that this kind of treatment wasn't an isolated case. It was part of a larger, more insidious culture that ran deep within the company. The more they uncovered, the more their determination to root out this behavior grew. The CEO didn't waste any time. He called a meeting with his senior leadership team, making sure to emphasize that the company's policies would not just be about diversity training. This was going to be a long-term effort, one that would require real change at every level. "We are not just addressing this situation," he said, his voice firm and clear. "We are creating a system that will actively prevent these incidents from happening again. We're going to be transparent. We're going to listen to our employees, and we're going to hold everyone accountable, starting with me." The team nodded in agreement, knowing this wasn't going to be a quick fix. There was a lot of work ahead, but the CEO was steadfast in his commitment to change. Over the following weeks, the company began implementing a series of initiatives designed to overhaul the way they handled discrimination. It wasn't enough to just acknowledge the issue. They had to address the root causes. The CEO personally oversaw the rollout of new hiring practices that focused not just on qualifications, but also on creating an inclusive environment where everyone, regardless of their background, could thrive. Meanwhile, the twins were still trying to process the overwhelming emotions of the past week. They were proud of their father's actions, but they also began to understand how difficult it was to fight against something as deeply ingrained as racial bias. It wasn't something that could be solved overnight, no matter how much power or money you had. One evening, after a long day of meetings, the CEO sat down with his children in his office. They were tired, the weight of the past few days weighing heavily on their shoulders, but they knew they had to keep pushing forward. "I know this isn't easy," he said, his voice softer now. "But the truth is, this is the work that needs to be done. It's not just about what happened at the airport. It's about ensuring that everyone has an equal chance to succeed, no matter where they come from or what they look like. That's the legacy we're building, one step at a time. The twins sat quietly, taking in his words. They had always admired their father, but now they saw him not just as a protector, but as a true leader, someone willing to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. The next morning, the CEO made a public appearance, addressing the nation and the world. He talked about the steps the company was taking to prevent discrimination, but he also made it clear that this wasn't just a corporate initiative. It was a movement. We're not just changing policies, he said. We're changing the way we think about each other. And that starts with acknowledging our biases, confronting them, and doing everything in our power to make sure no one ever feels less than because of the way they look, the color of their skin, or where they come from. The speech went viral, sparking conversations across the globe. People from all walks of life, from different races and backgrounds, reached out to express their support. The CEO's message was clear. This wasn't just about his family. It was about all of us. This was the moment the CEO and his children had changed the course of their own future and the world's. The journey had just begun. Weeks passed, and the impact of the CEO's bold stance began to ripple throughout the company. The new policies he had implemented were starting to take root, and employees at all levels began to feel the shift in the corporate culture. What had once been an unspoken, accepted part of the company's internal environment, discrimination, bias, and favoritism, was now being addressed head-on. The CEO's commitment to creating a more inclusive, transparent, and accountable company was more than just words. It was being backed up with real, measurable changes. The twins, still reeling from the events that had unfolded, found themselves more involved in the company's efforts than they had ever imagined. Their father, though ever the business leader, had made sure they were a part of the transformation, ensuring they understood the depth of what was at stake. "This is the future we are building," he said to them one evening as they sat together in the company's conference room. "This is about creating a world where no one is denied based on how they look, where no one is dismissed because of their background." They nodded, fully aware now that the fight wasn't just for justice. It was for something far bigger than themselves. The twins were learning the complexities of power and responsibility. Their father's actions had made them understand that leadership wasn't just about taking control. It was about protecting others and using your influence to change the world for the better. As the weeks turned into months, the company saw a significant shift. The diversity and inclusion efforts weren't just about hiring the right people. It was about creating a culture that fostered respect, understanding, and empowerment. And the CEO's efforts didn't stop at just his company. His message spread to other corporations, organizations, and even government officials. More and more companies began to take a hard look at their own practices and policies, and many followed in his footsteps. It wasn't long before the CEO was invited to speak at major conferences and on national television, addressing issues of race, bias, and corporate responsibility. His voice had become one of the leading ones in a growing movement that was calling for real change, not just in businesses, but across society. But it wasn't all easy. As the CEO continued to push for change, he faced opposition, too. There were people within his company who resisted the new policies, employees who had grown comfortable in the old ways and were reluctant to accept the shifts. The CEO, however, was unshaken. He knew the path to real change was never smooth. He had prepared for this moment his entire life. He had built his empire on the belief that success meant doing what was right, even when it was hard. One evening, as the twins sat in the living room of their home, they watched as their father appeared on a live interview on national television. The interviewer, a prominent journalist, began by asking, "How do you respond to those who say these changes are unnecessary, that corporate America doesn't need to focus on diversity and inclusion?" The CEO's face remained calm, but there was a fire in his eyes. "I disagree," he replied firmly. "If we truly want to lead, we have to lead with integrity. We have to create spaces where everyone, regardless of their race or background, can succeed. If we are not doing that, then we are failing, not just as business leaders, but as human beings." The journalist seemed taken aback by his certainty, but she pressed on, asking, "Do you think this movement will succeed, or is it just another corporate trend?" The CEO smiled, a small, knowing smile. "I believe it will succeed, he said confidently. Because it's not a trend. It's a necessity. And history will show that those who fought for what's right are the ones who changed the world, not the ones who sat on the sidelines. The interview ended, and the twins sat in silence for a moment. They could see their father's words resonating not just with them, but with the millions of viewers who were now paying attention to the story. They had witnessed firsthand the way their father had stood up to the unfairness they had faced. It wasn't just about the airport incident anymore. It was about transforming a culture that had been broken for far too long. And their father was leading the charge. The twins now realized they were part of something bigger, something that could change the world. They didn't just have the power of their family's name behind them. They had the power of truth, of justice, and of love for those who had been treated unfairly. It was a responsibility that would guide them for the rest of their lives. As the days passed, the CEO's influence grew, and the message of equality and fairness continued to spread. What had begun as a small act of defiance against an injustice had turned into a movement, one that would leave a lasting legacy for generations to come. And with every step they took, the twins knew they were not only honoring their father's legacy, but helping to create a new world for everyone. The CEO's public message resonated far beyond the walls of his company. It sparked a national conversation about race, privilege, and the systems that continue to perpetuate inequality. As weeks turned into months, the CEO and his family found themselves at the center of a movement that was slowly but steadily gaining momentum. The twins, who had once only seen their father as the powerful CEO of an empire, now saw him as the catalyst for a much-needed cultural shift. The weight of his influence and the responsibility it carried was something they were beginning to understand on a deeper level. They knew that this was more than just a moment in time. It was a revolution that needed to happen, and it was up to people like their father to lead the charge. Behind the scenes, the CEO's team continued to roll out new initiatives, ones that would challenge the very foundation of the industry. His company wasn't just making a statement. They were restructuring their approach to business, integrating diversity, equity, and inclusion into every facet of the organization. The CEO's leadership team was tasked with the responsibility of holding their employees accountable, ensuring that every action taken aligned with the values of fairness and integrity that had become the company's new core principles. As the CEO sat in the boardroom, reviewing progress reports with his team, his thoughts briefly turned to the initial incident at the airport. He remembered the look on his children's faces when they were denied entry, the shock in their eyes as they realized that the world could still treat them like outsiders, despite their privilege. It was that moment that had sparked everything. His drive to fix the broken systems that allowed such injustice to thrive had become his new mission. "This is only the beginning," he said firmly, looking around the table at his team. "We are not stopping here. We are going to ensure that our company leads by example. And that starts with making sure we are always learning and growing." His voice was calm, but there was a fire behind it that no one could ignore. His words carried weight, and those in the room understood the responsibility they now had. As the meeting continued, the CEO's team began discussing ways to make the company more transparent. They wanted to build a system where customers, employees, and even the general public could see exactly what steps they were taking to root out bias and discrimination. It wasn't enough to simply apologize or make promises. They needed to show the world that they were truly committed to change. Meanwhile, the twins had become more active in the company's initiatives. They began attending meetings, learning about the challenges their father was facing, and how his vision was being implemented. The more they saw, the more they realized that this wasn't just about fighting against something. It was about building something better. The twins were learning firsthand what it meant to be leaders, to not only lead with power, but with purpose. It wasn't just about the business empire their father had built. It was about leaving a legacy of fairness and equality for the generations that would follow. Months passed, and the CEO's efforts began to pay off. The company's new policies were making an impact, both internally and externally. Employees felt empowered, knowing that their voices were being heard, and that the company was actively working to make sure everyone was treated fairly, regardless of their race, gender, or background. Customers, too, began to take notice, praising the company for its bold stance and commitment to change. But the CEO wasn't satisfied yet. He knew that there was still much work to be done. As he sat with his children one evening, reflecting on the progress they had made, He spoke to them about the road ahead. "This journey isn't over," he said, his voice steady but resolute. "We've made a difference, yes, but there is always more to be done. We need to keep pushing, keep challenging the status quo, because that's the only way we can truly create the world we want to see." The twins, now fully aware of the weight of their father's words, nodded in agreement. They knew that the fight for equality and justice was a long one, but they were ready to continue standing by their father, pushing for a world where everyone, no matter who they were or where they came from, could thrive. As the CEO looked at his children, he felt a sense of pride. He had taught them so much about business, but more importantly, he had taught them about integrity, justice, and the importance of doing what was right, no matter the cost. The path they were walking together was one of purpose, one that would leave a lasting legacy for generations to come. Months passed, and the CEO's efforts began to reshape not only the company but the industry itself. He had started a movement, one that went beyond a single event or an apology. His commitment to systemic change was resonating not only with his employees but with businesses, communities, and individuals across the country. The more time the CEO spent addressing these issues, the more the twins understood just how deep the roots of inequality and discrimination ran. What had started as a personal fight for them had transformed into a broader battle for justice and equality. They began to see the true power of their father's leadership, and it left them in awe. But, despite the progress, there was still resistance. Not everyone within the company embraced the changes wholeheartedly. Some employees, who had grown comfortable with the old ways, resisted the new initiatives. There were moments of tension, moments when it seemed like the company might lose its way. But the CEO, ever resolute, didn't waver. He continued to push for what he believed was right, even when the path forward wasn't clear. "This is the price of change," he would say. "It's never easy, but it's always worth it." His resolve fueled the transformation, and slowly, even the most resistant employees began to understand the importance of the company's mission. Meanwhile, the twins grew more involved in the company's daily operations. Their father had always kept them somewhat sheltered from the complexities of the business world, but now, they were seeing firsthand what it took to run a company of this magnitude. They sat in on meetings, attended conferences, and helped shape the policies that were being implemented. For the first time, they felt the weight of their family's legacy. They were no longer just the children of a powerful CEO. They were becoming the leaders of tomorrow. One evening, the twins sat together in their father's office, reflecting on how far they had come. "I never imagined that a simple incident at the airport could turn into something like this," the son said, his voice filled with disbelief. "It's hard to believe that something so small could spark such a big change." His sister nodded in agreement. "But that's the thing, isn't it?" she said. "It's not just about one event. It's about how we choose to respond to it. We can either sit back and let things stay the same, or we can take a stand and make things right." The CEO, who had been quietly listening from his desk, smiled at his children. "Exactly," he said, his voice full of pride. "This is the real work. This is where change begins, by speaking out, standing up, and making sure that everyone is treated equally, no matter where they come from or what they look like." As the months went on, the CEO's message of accountability and fairness became a rallying cry for many. More businesses, inspired by his actions, began to institute their own diversity and inclusion initiatives. The movement, once sparked by a single moment of injustice, had now become a nationwide force. The CEO's commitment to change had ignited a fire, and it was spreading. The twins watched as the world began to take notice. They could see the difference their father was making, and they knew they had to continue his work. They weren't just inheriting a business empire, they were inheriting a cause, one that would change the future for the better. As the CEO stood before his employees one morning, delivering another speech about diversity and inclusion, he could see the transformation taking shape. The faces in the crowd were different than they had been months ago. There was a sense of hope now, a sense that real change was possible. "We've come a long way," he said, his voice steady. "But we are far from done. We will continue to grow, to learn, and to push for a future where everyone has an equal opportunity to succeed." The room erupted in applause, and the CEO felt a surge of pride. He knew this was only the beginning. The battle for equality was far from over, but it was no longer a fight he had to face alone. His children, his employees, and the world were behind him now, united in the pursuit of justice. The road ahead was still long, but they were ready to walk it together, with their heads held high, knowing they were part of something much bigger than themselves. Months had passed, and the landscape had changed. What started as a moment of personal injustice had grown into a powerful, far-reaching movement. The CEO's company had transformed, and his message was spreading far beyond the boardroom. People were talking, and businesses were listening. The twins, who had once only viewed their father as the man who ran the business, now saw him as a symbol of change, a force that was reshaping not only the corporate world but the very fabric of society. They had been with him through it all, the setbacks, the victories, the long nights, and now, they stood by his side as he made history. The company's new policies were being implemented at a rapid pace, and the CEO's influence was expanding. He had become a key figure in the ongoing conversation about race, equity, and inclusion. His stance had inspired other corporate leaders to take action, and soon, many large companies were announcing their own diversity initiatives. It was clear that the change the CEO had set in motion was more than just a trend. It was a tidal wave that could not be stopped. But with this newfound influence came new challenges. As the CEO spoke at conferences, appeared on news programs, and advocated for change in corporate America, he also faced fierce opposition. There were those who were uncomfortable with the way the conversation was shifting, those who believed the system had worked just fine for them and shouldn't be questioned. Critics called the CEO's efforts unnecessary, too extreme, even a threat to the way things had always been. But the CEO, ever determined, didn't let the opposition deter him. He had faced challenges throughout his career, and this was no different. In fact, he saw it as a sign that his efforts were having the intended effect. The resistance meant that the conversation was working, that it was forcing people to reckon with uncomfortable truths. One afternoon, as the CEO sat in his office, reviewing progress reports, his phone rang. It was his son. "Dad, we've been following the news. There's a lot of people pushing back against your message," his son said, concern lacing his voice. "Are you sure this is the right fight?" The CEO took a deep breath, looking out the window at the city skyline. "It's the right fight," he said calmly. "It always has been. Change doesn't come easily, especially when people have grown comfortable with the way things are. But that doesn't mean we stop. We keep pushing. We keep moving forward." His son nodded, even though his father couldn't see him. "I understand, Dad. I just don't want to see you get hurt." "I appreciate that," the CEO said, his voice softening. "But this isn't about me. It's about creating a future where no one is held back by the color of their skin or where they come from. This fight is bigger than any of us." As the conversation ended, the CEO's determination only grew stronger. The twins had been with him every step of the way, and they had learned the importance of standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. They were proud of their father, but more than that, they were ready to continue his work. They had seen firsthand the power of his leadership, and now, they were ready to take on the mantle themselves. The CEO had given them the tools to succeed, but more importantly, he had shown them the importance of using that success to create positive change. They had seen how their father's actions could impact not just their company, but the world. It was a responsibility they didn't take lightly. One morning, as the CEO prepared for another public address, he looked at his children, who had become key players in the company's efforts to promote diversity and inclusion. They had grown in ways he had never imagined, taking on more leadership roles and helping shape the future of the company. "I'm proud of you both," the CEO said, his voice filled with pride. "You've shown what it means to lead with integrity. This company, this movement, is in good hands." The twins, though still young, understood the weight of their father's words. They weren't just following in his footsteps. They were forging their own path, one that would carry on his legacy of justice, equality, and change. And so, the journey continued. The CEO, his children, and his company were no longer just part of a corporate empire. They were part of something much bigger, something that would leave a lasting impact on the world. They weren't just changing the way businesses operated. They were changing the way the world operated, and they were just getting started. As the months continued to unfold, the CEO's efforts began to have a profound and lasting impact. What had started as a single act of standing up for his children had transformed into a global movement, a movement that reshaped not only his company, but the industries that looked up to him. People from all corners of the world were now watching, following, and engaging with the work that had been set in motion. The CEO, standing firm in his vision, had made it clear, this wasn't just about business. It was about creating a world where fairness and equality were the guiding principles, not exceptions. The changes within the company were now not just surface-level adjustments. They had become ingrained in the company's DNA. The new policies were actively being implemented at every level, from hiring to training to community outreach. Employees who had once resisted the changes were now becoming some of the biggest advocates for them. The CEO's commitment to diversity and inclusion had set a precedent that was hard to ignore, and those who had initially doubted its importance were starting to see its value. Meanwhile, the twins had become even more involved in shaping the future of the company. Their father, who had once kept them somewhat distanced from the inner workings of the business, now included them in key decisions. They attended meetings with him, helped strategize new initiatives, and even met with clients and partners to discuss how to further promote inclusivity. They had learned more about leadership in the past few months than they ever could have imagined, and their understanding of what it truly meant to. Let had shifted. It was no longer about power or wealth. It was about responsibility and the ability to make a meaningful difference in the world. The CEO watched his children grow into their roles with a sense of pride. He had always known they were capable, but now, he saw them taking ownership of their future in ways he hadn't anticipated. They were no longer just following his example. They were setting their own. And that, he realized, was the true legacy he was building. One evening, after a long day of meetings and strategy sessions, the CEO sat down with his children. They had just wrapped up a presentation for a major potential client, discussing the company's commitment to diversity and inclusion. The client had been impressed, but it was the CEO's closing statement that had truly resonated with them. "We are not just in business to make money," the CEO had said during the meeting, his voice steady and unwavering. "We are in business to make a difference. Every decision we make, every step we take, is with the goal of ensuring a fairer, more equitable future for everyone. We know that true success is not measured by how much wealth we accumulate, but by how many lives we change for the better." Sitting in his office now, the CEO looked at his children. "I want you both to understand something important," he said, his tone serious. "This isn't just about business. This is about leaving the world better than we found it. This is about showing the next generation that they can succeed, no matter who they are or where they come from." The twins nodded, understanding the weight of his words. They had come a long way from the shocked children at the airport, and they were beginning to see that this journey wasn't just about their father's company. It was about shaping the future, both for their family and for the world. The CEO's message was clear. They weren't just leaders of a business empire. They were leaders of a movement. And as they continued to push forward, they knew they had the power to create real, lasting change. The legacy they were building wasn't just about profits or success. It was about transforming the world, one step at a time. As the CEO looked at his children, he felt a deep sense of pride. They had grown so much, and he knew that the future was in good hands. Together, they were not just continuing the family business. They were continuing a mission to make the world a better place for everyone, regardless of race, gender, or background. And that, in the end, would be their true success. The CEO turned back to the window, looking out over the city. There was still so much work to be done, so many battles to fight. But he knew that with his children by his side, they would continue to push forward, never backing down, never giving up. Because the change they had started was only the beginning.